Thank you for everybody for coming here tonight on such a cold evening, but we've got a pretty warm church here, so that makes up for it. This is going to be done in the sort of traditional, what's become now traditional, television question time format. We're lucky, of course, tonight to have all 5 candidates for Battersea, and apparently this is the first time they've done an event together. They don't really need introducing, they've all got their rosettes on, apart from one who hasn't got their rosette on, and therefore it's obvious who they are as well. And what I'm going to do is, there are various questions that have been put together by the organisers, but I'm sure that also people in the audience will have lots of questions as well. So I'll vary it a bit, and depending on how it goes, questions from on the list or questions from the floor. Let's enjoy ourselves, and let's get to grips with what are some really important issues. The election here in Battersea is the most active, the most exciting really that I've seen in the 29 years I've lived here, under 4 MPs I think it is. We certainly had more paper through the door than ever before, I think, which may not be very environmental, I suppose. I forecast this seat entirely wrong last time round, and I'm not going to bother this time. I mean, it really is unforecastable, as indeed is most of the country. But it does look a very exciting fight. And of course, 2019 will go down in history as the year of Brexit, as indeed will probably 2020, 2021 and so on. But it will also, I think, come in 50 years' time, will come to be seen by historians as the year in which environmental issues and climate change forced themselves onto the political agenda, and I think in a way that's here to stay, that the interest in climate change as an issue in this election is far greater, polls show, than it was even in 2017, which was only 2.5 years ago. So, the first question is a very simple and broad one. Will candidates each explain, if elected, how they would work to address the climate change crisis with the urgency that they think it deserves? Mark Gitsham, Liberal Democrat.
Hi, thank you. Thank you all for coming, and it's great to be here. The climate emergency has come up as being has been probably the most important issue of our time. As you'll know, as a Liberal Democrat, I'm standing to stop Brexit. But if you ask me a question, what is most important, Brexit or the climate emergency, absolutely, it has to be the climate emergency, because without fixing that, we don't have anywhere to live. We won't have a planet in which to have issues about Brexit on. However, I think the most important way of dealing with the climate emergency quickly is to stop Brexit, to make sure that we're working with our European partners internationally, because as much as what we can do in this country, we've also got to work with everybody else around the world to make sure things are happening everywhere at the same time. Now, the Liberal Democrats have got a clear policy on the climate emergency. We'll invest £100 billion. We will make our energy renewable by 80% within 10 years. In that same 10 years, we'll get rid of petrol and diesel cars from going into our system. We will halve emissions from where they are now. We will also set up a new Department of the Environment in Parliament to make sure that everything that is done by every government department has the environment at the heart of it. By acting quickly now and by reducing emissions now, we can make the real change. People argue about whether it should be 2050, 2045, 2040, 2030, which some parties want to go for or now don't, as to when we should reach net zero. I think the most important thing is that we reduce our emissions by the biggest amount as quickly as we possibly can, so that we've got a chance to save the planet.
Thank you. Kim Caddy, you're the Conservative candidate. How would you address the climate change crisis?
Well, for me, climate change and the effect that humans have on the environment is the biggest issue that's facing our planet at the moment. I think there are 2 issues that I would really draw out. The first one is I do think, as someone who studied biological sciences, and that makes me by no means an expert, and it was many years ago. But I do think that it's really important that we listen to the scientists and that we are driven by the scientific data and the scientific facts when we're making decisions about how to combat climate change. I also think that it's really, really important to garner cross-party support. And actually here in Wandsworth, I'm a Wandsworth councillor, and one of the things that we did on Wandsworth Council was to declare a climate emergency and to publish an environmental strategy. And actually crucial, I think, to getting public support and bringing hearts and minds with us on these kind of ideas is getting cross-party support, and we were able to get all of the councillors across the council to support that. And I thank my colleagues in the Labour Party for working with us and working positively with us to get change, because I do think that having a consensus and raising the issue across party and across all of the fantastic organisations that are here today would be really important. And one of the things that I will pledge if I'm elected is to work with all of the organisations here, like Living Streets and Extinction Rebellion, and all of the political parties here, to make sure that actually we do bring people with us. So for me, it's getting that scientific evidence and it's bringing hearts and minds together.
Thank you, Kim. Marsha de Cordova, you've been the Labour MP here for the last 2.5 years. How would you work in future to address the climate change crisis?
Well, firstly, can I say hello, and it's great to see so many of you here on what is a very cold Thursday evening. And it has been a pleasure to serve the people of Battersea for the last 2.5 years. Now, nobody will dispute that there is a climate emergency, and that is why I was proud that the Labour Party this year in May, we passed a motion in Parliament that declared there being a climate emergency, and I was proud to speak in that debate and also vote to declare that emergency. Today, we published our manifesto, and that manifesto set out exactly how we will tackle the climate crisis that we face, and that is through our Green New Deal. And that Green New Deal is a real transformation. As in the 20th century there needed to be an industrial revolution, now we face this crisis. It is about implementing and installing a new green industrial strategy that will tackle these issues. And we are looking at this as a strategic priority. It is the biggest issue facing us. We have got places that are currently burning, and we've got in the Arctic it's melting. So the things that we are looking at doing are introducing a zero carbon home standard. We're actually going to upgrade almost 27 million homes to the highest energy efficient standards, and that is going to save families hundreds of pounds over the next 5 to 10 years. We will be banning fracking because I think it's fair to say over the past 9 years there's been a lot of backpedalling. Because in 2008, we were the party to introduce a department for energy and climate change, and it's just unfortunate that that department is no longer in existence. So we will ban fracking and we will invest in renewable energies. And we are going to look at how we can create green jobs by introducing climate apprenticeships, and that will be tens of thousands of jobs all the way up to 2030, including apprenticeships in engineering and technicians, because ultimately, it is about transforming our society, because if we don't, what will happen to the generations that follow behind us? It is our responsibility to do that. We will be developing more onshore and offshore wind farms. And as I say, during my time as the Member of Parliament for this area, I was proud to campaign and vote against any further expansion of Heathrow, because we know the problems there. And that is another example of where the Labour Party has worked cross-party with different local authority councils, including Wandsworth, to challenge any further expansion on Heathrow, because we don't need that here, because actually we need to protect our environment.
Thank you, Marsha. Marsha said that nobody would dispute that there is a climate emergency. I suspect one or two people in your party might, Jake Thomas. Where do you stand on this?
Well, I totally disagree with him. I mean, I am up for climate emergency 100%. I mean, like so many of you standing here today, it's deeply worrying to me the irreversible damage we are causing our planet and the imminent need to eliminate the use of all fossil fuels in our everyday lives. And we are now working with a guy in the Brexit Party called James Poynton, who is our parliamentary candidate for Hampstead and Kilburn, and also a carbon trader and international treaty lawyer who was directly involved in the Kyoto Protocol. The environmental contract the Brexit Party is putting on the people will include geothermal technology. These electric stations will produce less than 5% carbon dioxide produced by conventional coal-fired plants. Plus with another source of potential energy we are proposing is tidal energy. As you can see, I'm a layperson with energy, but as I say, we've got the backing in our party, and what more can I say?
Thank you very much indeed, Jay. And finally on this question, Lois Davies from the Green Party. How would you address the climate crisis if you were elected?
Well, our leader, Jonathan Barclay, our co-leader, said recently, if the climate crisis was a bank, we would have bailed it out by now. And that isn't exactly what we need to do. We too have a Green New Deal. Ours was first proposed by our lone MP in Caroline Lucas in 2008, and we've been finessing it and developing it ever since. What it has in it, quick sort of overview, we need to manage the economy differently. We need to replace GDP as a measure of our success with a metric based on health and well-being of the people and the environment. So we propose a carbon chancellor to take on the responsibilities of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. We want to see the government being legally mandated to meet net zero carbon emissions by 2030. And that carbon chancellor will be responsible for making all the decisions based on what the carbon budget can afford. We want to put a huge investment into renewable energy. We think mainly wind energy for Britain, and we think by 2030, with the kind of investment we're proposing, we could get 70% of our energy provided by wind, and the rest would be geothermal, solar, tidal, hydro, electric energy, and so on. We need to upgrade our energy infrastructure. We need an electricity grid that can double its capacity. We'll invest in that. We need to improve our energy storage systems. We'll invest in that. We need to invest in research and development for renewables. And so move our whole energy production away from its dependency on fossil fuels. And this will create thousands and thousands of new jobs, but they need investment. We'll do other things like work with the Crown Estate, which owns much of the UK's coastline, to open up more coastal waters for offshore wind and marine energy, and enable communities to develop their own renewable energy projects so the benefits of locally generated energy can stay local. And of course, energy savings, like the Labour Party. I think we've both got the same figure on that, actually. 60 billion into insulating homes to save energy. And ours goes a bit deeper, a bit further. We want to retrofit. We want to get away from gas boilers and the heating systems that depend on the wrong kind of energy. And of course, transport overall. Again, moving away from the fossil fuel dependency, getting people out of their cars. We don't have the time for people to be moving around in a single unit. We need to invest in public transport, preferably take it back into public ownership, so that we can make sure that the fares people pay are going back into developing our public transport, and of course, aviation. We'll reduce aviation by putting a frequent flyer tax on flights, sorry, And we also obviously oppose all airport expansion, not just Heathrow or Gatwick, everything.
Thank you very much, Lois. Right, I'll ask one more question, but if you can then after that I will throw it open to the floor for some questions from you. So if you could be thinking about what you'd like to ask. The second question that I'd like to ask is that the Financial Times recently wrote that we can be green or we can have growth, but we can't have both together. Now, I'd like to ask the candidates, would they be willing to countenance the contraction of our economy in order to help resolve the climate change crisis and reduce emissions? Marsha.
Countenance. Okay, so what I would say to that, Michael, because I believe that this is a climate crisis, and that has to be the priority going forward. Now, in order to address that, we do need to adequately invest, and that will require bold and progressive policies like we have announced today. But that is the only way that we are going to be able to look at actually renewable energies, because that's one of the ways out of this crisis. We will have to invest in research and development. We have to invest in our greener jobs and a greener economy, because how else are we going to get that growth if we don't go green?
But if people fly less, use their cars less, isn't there a possibility that will lead to a contraction in our economy? And would that be a price worth paying?
Well, when you want to talk about whether people fly less, then or use different transport modes, we have to ensure that we've got a good transport infrastructure that is efficient. So whether that's through electrifying our railways, or whether we are making all our transport networks fully inclusive and accessible, those are the ways that we can actually ensure that our system and our economy can keep moving and people can travel. Because we can say people need to stop flying, but actually it's that you're now focusing on the individual, when what we also need to be focusing on is business and how our economy works and how it's run.
Okay, Jake Thomas, what do you think?
Well, as I say, we're going to propose to invest in geothermal technology. So, huge investment, obviously, but endless jobs. We're planning to put plants in Cornwall to actually energise the south, Wales to energise the Midlands, and plants in Scotland to energise the north.
Mark Gitsham, do you think it's possible that, and would you be willing to go along with it if the price of dealing with climate change is a reduction in the economy? Is that something that you're willing to face?
I don't think there's a need for the economy to slow necessarily in order for us to be able to turn to green energies and become carbon neutral. During the coalition years, Ed Davey, as the Environment Minister, actually helped to increase the wind power generation, which leads us to being in the position we are now with the amount of wind power generation we have. And the factories for that were built, for the sales of that were built in Hull, which was a huge boost for the economy there and brought a lot of jobs into an area that was actually really deprived. So there's a huge amount of opportunity and possibility in putting the investment into the areas of the country that need the jobs. Liberal Democrats will also actually have a fund which, if an area of the country suffers as a result of changes for environmental needs, that those funds will go in there to support the communities. In reality, if Britain's a world leader in green industries, green technologies, that provides a huge amount of new jobs for people in Britain, which can then be exported around the world as everybody else is catching up. I don't think there's a need for the economy to suffer as a result. However, the important thing is that we do deal with the climate emergency, but let's do it in a way, quite easily in a way, which will actually provide more jobs and more money.
Lois, you seem to be suggesting from what you were saying before that you are willing to sacrifice growth for dealing with this problem.
Well, the Green Party isn't against growth per se. We certainly intend to see a huge growth in our renewable energy industry. And so, for similar reasons as people have said, we don't have to contract our economy to be green. We just have to move it into a completely different sphere. Renewable energy, move from arms to renewables, and still develop the technology that Britain is very famous for, but put it into the right place for the planet.
Kim?
I do think it's a bit of a false dichotomy. I don't think we do need to sacrifice growth to go green. And
the Financial Times seemed to think that it wasn't a dichotomy. You can't have growth and be environmental at the same time.
I think if we invest in green energy and we invest in the kind of technologies that Mark was talking about, so things like carbon capture technology, things like offshore wind, we can be world leaders in those areas, and then we can generate growth and jobs in those areas, and I think that's absolutely crucial. And it goes back to what I said as the answer to the first question, is taking people with us. And I think if we see a reduction in the economy, and we see a reduction in growth, and we don't have the kind of economy that supports the public services that we all want and we all need, I don't think we will bring people with us. I think we need to invest in those green jobs and those green technologies to make sure that we do have that functioning economy that can, and then we can then take people with us and get support for the green agenda. So I do think it's incredibly important.
Thank you. Right, now let me call on you to put some questions. I'm sure you've all got questions, but people are always reluctant to be the first on these occasions. Right, no reluctance at all. Excellent. Right, the lady just here in the blue and silver scarf. Would you like to stand up and tell us your name?
My name's Camilla. I'm local, a bit further down there. So my question is that whoever becomes the MP for Battersea, what's going to be the first thing you're going to do for Battersea to make us go greener?
Good question. What's the first thing you do for Battersea to make us go greener? Jake?
Well, basically, we're going to recycle everything in the UK 100%. So,
100%?
Yeah.
Is that Brexit Party policy?
It is, and everything. Nothing's going out of the country.
Well, that's I wasn't aware of that policy, but an interesting one. What's the figure at the moment? Do you know, Kim? You're a councillor.
I don't know the figures.
You're a councillor in Battersea, do you know? In Wandsworth?
I don't know off the top of my head what the recycling percentage is. It's something like 24%.
I think we've got one of the lowest in the country.
Have we? All right.
We do, and hopefully I'll get a chance to talk about that.
What would be the first thing you would do if you were elected the MP on the 12th of December?
I think there's a couple of things. I think from a national perspective, I'd be immediately lobbying for a really quick environment bill to come through with some really sort of key pledges in terms of, for example, having an environmental protection office to make sure that actually we have, as people have already referred to this evening, we have proper targets for our environmental goals, and actually the government is held to account to those targets by an independent monitor. I think that's something that's really important. Locally, I think air quality is the biggest thing.
Because it was the first thing, so let's move on to the others. Right.
One local, one national. I can do two things at once.
Lois, your first thing.
Well, I'm pleased to say we've got 10 bills lined up, ready to go.
Just tell us what the first one will be.
But it's so that as soon as we get in there, we can start presenting these bills. We've got the Green New Deal bill, which would get
right. Well, which
the
is
UK
the most
on
important
track.
one of the? I mean, you're going to be the Environment Secretary, I hear, in government. But what's your first bill?
Well, in many ways, one of the most important bills might be the Future Generations Bill, which would require public bodies, including the UK government, to balance the needs of the present with the needs of the future.
Interesting thought. Mark Gitsham.
Well, I mean, the first thing I'll do is my personal pledge, which is that I'm personally planting trees to offset all the bits of paper that we've been sending through all your doors. So,
blimey, that's going to be a forest, isn't it?
It's quite long this way, but for everything that our local campaigns put through, I'm going to be doing that.
And what about the leaflets we've been getting from Nicola Horlick?
I'll have a chat with them about that one.
The resident survey from Nicola Hawley, which is what, 3 miles away, 2 miles away?
Yeah, just over the river. Just over the river. I mean, but mainly also as well is to stop the use of single-use plastics, to phase those out completely within 3 years.
Thank you. And Marsha.
Thank you. So obviously, firstly, if I'm re-elected as the MP, so it'll be a Labour government, hopefully, and so we will implement our legislation around our Green New Deal. But the issues that I would tackle locally are around air quality.
Just one. You would just...
Around air quality, but also safer cycling in the borough.
Thank you. Right. Madam, you asked the question. If you drafted in as the MP, because all of these people suddenly vanish, what would your first thing be?
Oh my God, the list would be very long, so it's very hard to do. But safer cycling is brilliant. I really support that.
Right, thank you. Okay, let's have another question. I can see a hand with a dark sleeve at the back and a gentleman behind it, I think. Yes, what's your name? Just hold on a moment for the mic.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's great.
I'm Jerry. I'm a local resident for about 20 plus years. First of all, point about this growth or not growth, it's a false equation because the growth isn't factoring in all the climate-related costs that come with that growth. So
Okay.
you factor those in, and it's not.
All right, well, what's your question, please?
My question is, and this is to everyone apart from the Green candidate, is everyone's coming out with all these sound bites. The only reason there's been a climate emergency stated is because of what Extinction Rebellion and the rest of the climate activists have done in the last 2 years. So could you each tell me, why should I believe that any of you is actually genuine about what you're talking about and are not just coming out with sound bites to please what is currently a popular opinion to have?
Mark, you're a Liberal Democrat. Why should we believe a word you say?
Hi, thank you. So, I mean, why should you trust what I'm saying about the climate emergency? Yeah, I mean, Extinction Rebellion have done a great job at getting this moved up the political ladder, particularly the demonstrations that were done last April time made a huge difference in the corridors of power. But on a personal level, I've always cared about the environment. I grew up in the country. I actually grew up, and my parents lived right next to a village called Fishlake, which has been in the news a lot lately. They luckily didn't flood, but the neighbours did. So we're seeing directly what the effects of the climate emergency is having there. My dad was a farmer, and we've seen the changes in the landscape over the time since I was a young child, and how it's having a direct effect. I always, so I've growing up in that environment, I've always cared hugely about it. If we don't do things now, we're already seeing in our lifetimes the changes that are happening, and they're happening faster and faster around the world. This is our time right now to do something now. We've been told we've got 11 years. We don't want to wait those 11 years. We want to take action now, and that is why I'm standing.
Kim Caddy, your leader has made quite a few promises that haven't been kept. Why should we believe a word that you say on this?
Well, as I said, the environment is something which I've cared about for a long time, and as I said, I did a biology degree at university, and environmental science was one of the topics that we studied, and I've always been interested in it, and I'm delighted that it's been able to come much more to the front of people's minds, and it's become a much more sort of popular topic. I think in terms of why you can trust that I mean what I say, it's fantastic to see so many children here this evening, and it makes me wish that I'd brought my 2 children, an 8-year-old and an 11-year-old, who are always talking to me about climate change, always talking to me about the environment, and that is one of the real reasons that I absolutely will fight incredibly hard to make sure that we really do take genuine, proper, science-led decisions to protect our environment, because I want to protect it for my children. It's so important to them as well as it is to me.
Jake, there's quite a few, I think, climate change sceptics in your party. Presumably you're willing to rebel against some of them. I mean, why should we believe you on this?
Well, I mean, basically, as I say, I'm a total novice when it comes to climate, but as I say, I have faith in our Brexit Party candidate, James Poynton, who is obviously no one can dispute what an expert the guy is. I mean, he's lived and breathed. Has anyone heard of James Poynton, by the way? He's you haven't?
Well, we have now.
Well, yeah. As I say, he was a lawyer who helped to write the Kyoto Climate Protocol, so basically, yeah.
Thank you. And Marsha, why should we believe anything that you say on this?
Other than it's the truth. Firstly, Jerry, can I say thank you for your question? And I want to start by firstly paying tribute to all the young people, the climate strikers and all those school children that actually were going out there and demonstrating, because they made us stop and listen, which is absolutely right. And as the constituency MP, I met with lots of children and received many pieces of correspondence from young people. And you know what? That is what this is all about. This climate emergency is about protecting that next generation. And that is why today, when we published our manifesto, pretty much 75% of it is dedicated to that green industrial strategy. Because that is the only way forward. It's not about me, and it's probably not about many of the adults in this room, but it's about that next generation of young people. But also, we have to think globally as well, because it's about all the other countries like Africa, the Amazon, and Australia also.
Now, the questioner excluded you, Lois, so do you mind? No. Right, great. We'll move on. He obviously trusts you. Can I ask Jago Travis, who I think wants to ask a question? Jago, wait for the microphone, please.
Children like me are missing school to try and be heard. Yeah, it's not working. Well, that's what it seems to be. My questions are, when are you going to start listening, and when are you going to act? Because right now, it's all talk and no action.
Kim Caddy, you represent the government here tonight. When are you going to listen and act?
Well, I think we absolutely are listening, and we're very much hearing you. The government have put forward lots of policies that are going to vastly improve the environment. It's clearly very important to the Conservative Party. We've got a £500 million Blue Planet Fund, which will help protect the oceans, dealing with things like plastic pollution and overfishing. We've got a £640 million fund, Nature for Climate Fund, which is really important in terms of the number of trees being planted across the country. And we've also got a £500 million fund that's just been announced for electric vehicle charges to try and improve the infrastructure and the network that we have there. And actually, in terms of action, I've been taking action locally on this for some time. As I said, I'm a member of Wandsworth Council, and it's one of my big priorities on the council to improve the environment, and particularly locally, things like air quality, cycling, improving our high streets and our public spaces to make them more pedestrian friendly and more cycling friendly, dealing with plastic usage. One of the simplest things that myself and my licensing colleague did was write to all the businesses in Wandsworth and just ask them to stop using plastic straws. And we had just an incredible response. We got so many letters back from people saying that absolutely they were going to stop using them, weren't going to use them anymore, and what a great initiative. And there are so many things that we can do like that locally. So I have been taking action, and I do think it's important, but we are listening to you.
Kim, do you think it was right for school children to go on strike? What would you have said if you were a parent of one of your children who wanted to, well, when they're a bit older probably, but do you think, would you have supported that?
Yeah, absolutely. My 8-year-old, my 11-year-old, they did a sort of a mini strike at school. So basically they went and walked around the playground a few times and they held placards. They didn't go into central London or whatever, but they, you know, I absolutely would support them if that was what they wanted to do, of course.
Marsha.
Well, already, you say, why won't we act, was it Jago?
Yeah.
Yeah, when are we going to act? Well, we are taking action already. Already in London, we have the Mayor of London that is committed to the environment and to the climate crisis. And in London, he's already introduced an ultra-low emission zones because we recognise the air quality is so poor, and that is why many schools locally are already working in partnership with community energy groups to actually plant more trees and ensure there's more forestry around their schools to actually ensure there is better air quality. And I'm pleased that Wandsworth Council have now finally agreed to work with Crew Energy locally to start looking at how we can improve the air quality around our schools, because as you rightly point out, you know, young people have had to take the stand for actually some people in authority to listen, because we've got a government that hasn't really taken the climate crisis seriously. And like I said, I'm really proud that we were the party that declared that climate emergency, and I've been proud to go on demonstrations with young people and marching for a better climate emergency. Thank you.
Jake, do you think school children were right to go on strike?
Oh, definitely.
Did yours? You've got any kids?
I have, yeah.
And?
Yeah, they went on strike. A couple of them went up to London to the Extinction Rebellion at Oxford Circus.
Right. And Mark, what's your response to Jake? Jago, sorry.
Hi, Jago. Yes, we are listening. Believe me, people are listening, and it's important that people keep demonstrating. I think the question isn't should children be demonstrating outside schools. It's why are they demonstrating, and why are people not doing the things that need to be done so that they don't need to anymore? That is the biggest question on this. When are we acting? Well, our government has let us down, and I don't believe the opposition has done a good job either of making sure that the government's been held to account. We've spent 3.5 years talking about Brexit and nothing else, and it's time that we got a change in our parliament and a change in the people who lead our country so that we can get that out of the way as quickly as possible, which I believe the only way to do that is just to stop it, and then get on with the important things like the climate emergency. If we just carry on now with this going on for years and years and years of people arguing and bickering backwards and forwards, not talking to each other, parties not being willing to work cross parties to discuss things and actually get things sorted out, then we'll not be acting. The important thing is, hopefully at this election, people will put a fresh group of people into Parliament so that we can act, and we will act straight away, and I promise you I will act straight away.
Just on that, when the Liberal Democrats were in coalition with the government, what was their position on banning fracking?
So, actually, the Liberal Democrats have always been against fracking, and if you look, interestingly, being in a coalition government means you don't have your own way, particularly when you're the junior partner. You get much less of your way than the other party, although we did get 70% of our manifesto passed. But when it comes down to fracking, Ed Davies, the education minister, did manage to put in rules, which you'll have seen lately in the news, that once you get a certain small level of ground movement, the fracking has to stop. And that has effectively put a stop on it through to now. Now, the Conservative Party wanted fracking, so we as a junior party couldn't put a stop on it, but we put a stop on it actually happening, and now we will ban it.
And Lois?
Well, Jake, it's not just the government that's not taking things seriously, really, is it? I think it's our political system. And that's why some of the ideas that Extinction Rebellion have come forward with, like citizens' assemblies, are the way to go to change things. We have to be able to deliberate, we have to be able to engage citizens in the decision making that's going to affect them. And along with that also goes things like changing the way we vote, fairer votes with a different system of voting, giving votes at 16 so that the people
I think we're straying a bit, aren't we, from the issues here. But anyway, let's thanks Lois. Jago, have you did you go on the on strike?
No, not yet. I'm trying to.
You're planning to, right? Okay. Thanks very much. Thank you for your question.
Would he?
Can I take another question from the audience? Let me have I'll come down here in a moment. Let me go right to the back, in the middle there, please. Yep, that person there, yeah.
Hi, my name is Max Jackson, and I would like to ask, the entire debate so far has been about renewable energy and the changes in our political system. And I would like to also ask all the parties about where their stance is on conservation and preserving all the amazing wildlife that we have in the UK no one hears about, and in fact is very rare now because of being practically destroyed by developments. So I want to know how the parties can sustainably develop the country and how they're going to conserve the wildlife that we have already.
Jake, you're an endangered species. How are you going to conserve wildlife?
Well, basically you plant more trees and, to create natural habitats for the animals and species, and basically, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Marsha.
Brilliant. Okay, well, that's such an important aspect, 'cause as you've rightly pointed out, we were covering so many different issues, but protecting our wildlife is a priority, and one of the things that we will be committed to is ensuring that we create more national parks which will actually guard our existing wildlife and our sites, but also make sure that we can keep with all the important habitats that are around. We're also very committed to ensuring that we have more trees and forestry, because we know that over the past 9 or so years, much of the Forestry Commission, for example, they had their spending cut, and also those jobs were cut within those commissions. And so we are committed within our Environment Agency to ensure that we maintain our green spaces, and we've got some great ones here, but also ensuring that we protect our wildlife.
Where are you planning to set up new national parks?
Well, that's nationally. I didn't say in Battersea.
No, but I mean, you've just told us
but
there isn't much room in
That is something, and obviously when we're in government, we will actually be looking at areas where that can happen and consulting, working and co-producing this with the public.
So you haven't got anywhere in mind yet?
Not me personally. No.
Right, okay. Mark, what would you do about protecting wildlife and conservation?
I mean, it is a huge issue in our environment, and again, like, I'm a local Battersea resident, but grew up as a child in the countryside. 4 in 10 of our rivers are polluted, which is just really not good enough. We need to look at the issues that are causing problems in our countryside and in our parks. The loss of insects, the damage that chemicals, pesticides, things like that do to our environment, and eradicate them. And we need to move forward with, particularly with farming, move forward with funds, changing the way we look at the way that we fund our farming systems to ensure that we're actually supporting greener practices, food being produced in an environmentally friendly way, and also planting more trees, which act as the lungs of the nation, and more hedgerows. Hedgerows are being ripped out across the country. We need more hedgerows to work as the motorways for wildlife.
Kim?
Well, it goes back to that £640 million fund which I mentioned earlier, which is going to be used for things like planting trees, reclaiming peat bogs, and I think this actually goes hand in hand with the idea of zero carbon targets, because protecting our natural resources and increasing diversity, it creates carbon sinks, so that we're actually doing both sides of the coin at the same time. I think it's also really important that we show international leadership, and some of our international development funding can potentially go towards helping other countries work towards maintaining and improving the diversity of plant life and animal life in their countries. And I also do think it is really important that we reform the system by which we subsidise farmers, so that we make sure that we reward them for taking really good care of the land and using sustainable practices.
Kim, do you really think £640 million is going to be enough to deal with this? I mean, the Liberal Democrats are talking about £100 billion over the lifetime of the next Parliament to invest enough money to plant enough trees, and I believe your party came out with a 30 million figure, ours came out with a 60
Surely
million.
Surely 100 billion is not going just on trees.
Not just on trees, but she
I was just about to say, this is a very specific fund called the Nature for Climate Fund, which is dealing with this exact issue that the the gentleman asked about. So there's much more investment going on green, issues and the environment, and well, I mean,
just we haven't seen
our
any
government
evidence from the
our government have showed incredible leadership on this, actually, because we're the first major economy to legislate for net zero carbon by 2050. We're the first major economy to do it. We are showing leadership internationally.
Lois.
Well, we've got our Sustainable Economy Bill for that, which will be setting legally binding targets for biodiversity, soil health and air quality, and then a couple of other really useful ideas. Scrap HS2. It threatens about 100 ancient woodlands. Scrap the government's road building programme, because that's also going to affect our wildlife and our biodiversity. And all the parties are discussing how many trees they're going to plant. How about stopping cutting them down, like our council did with on Tooting Common, when they cut down, I think, about 100 chestnut trees in Chestnut Avenue, like we're doing at the moment. Thessaly Road play space is going, few trees going there for building new homes. Great, but we've got so many unaffordable homes up in tower blocks all over the show that if we just built the right homes, we wouldn't need to cut down trees to build more homes.
Right, can I have another question, please? I've never been at an event with so many hands. I'm going to go for the woman here in the black and silvery shirt. If you could tell us who you are, and a short question, please. And let's hope we get some short answers as well.
Hi, I'm Paula Walker, and I do confess that I'm also a Wandsworth councillor, but a Labour councillor, and we have all voted on the climate emergency. However, I have in my hand a document, the Draft Carbon Management Plan. It was published in 2010. It never came off, was moved forward. It stayed draft, got shelved, and that's when the coalition government came in, and Wandsworth Council did nothing. So we've lost 9 years. So my question...
This is a Wandsworth council plan. Yeah.
Yes, it's a piece of paper, and it's great. There's lots of graphs and figures. We could have done what we're saying we're going to do now 9 years ago, but instead, we've just let things lie. So we're in crisis. So my question to all the panel members is: if you are in Parliament, what will you do to work with local authorities to make sure that those local authorities are empowered and we can work together to make sure that we deal with this crisis?
Kim, you are a Wandsworth councillor. I can't remember when you were first elected, but you're probably the best person to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't been doing nothing over the last 9 years. That's ridiculous. We've spent 82 million over 5 years improving energy efficiency in our housing stock. We've launched multiple campaigns to improve things like air quality. We've improved the air quality in Putney High Street. I think it went from something like 76 incidences of exceeding NO2 particulate to 20. It's improved massively. So we haven't been doing nothing for 9 years. That's just not the case. And we now have a really, really good laser focus in terms of we've got a strategy which we've all signed up to, and I think in the new year we'll be publishing a detailed action plan which will talk about how we will get Wandsworth carbon neutral by 2030, which I think would be a great achievement for the local area.
Mark.
Well, Liberal Democrat policy is to work with local councils in order to make sure that these sorts of plans are put in place and are actioned. There are funds available to ensure that we're doing this across the country. Some of the things, for example, is that we need to be recycling our food waste. I mean, why in Wandsworth are we not recycling our food waste? And I did actually pay a visit to the Western Riverside Waste Recycling Centre that recycles everything else for us in other boroughs. They said it was very doable. There are other boroughs that do it, not directly through their site, but in another site. But that possibly the council weren't doing it because they were worried about the upfront cost. Now, whatever the upfront cost, actually in the end, you're going to be better off to be an upfront cost on some bins. But things like that need to be dealt with and sorted out. I'm still amazed that in a pretty central London council we're not recycling our food waste.
Well, perhaps Kim could tell us.
Can I respond to that? That's obviously a question that I asked, and you know, clearly that it's an obvious difference between us and several other councils, and it goes back to what I was saying about having science-based, science-led approaches, because what our environmental officers have told us is that the number of lorry movements that you would have to expand in order to pick up food waste separately and take it to these separate delivery areas would totally neutralise and beyond the benefit that you would get from actually recycling the food waste in the first place. So whilst it might look good and it might feel good, actually it wouldn't be having any benefit whatsoever.
Lois, there are opportunities to overcome that. First of all, actually you would be better off than the lorry movements. But a lot of Wandsworth runs along the river, particularly Battersea and Putney. We've Western Riverside centres, there's 2 of them on the river already. They send all their recycling along the river. Why don't you just utilise the river?
That's a brilliant system. We send everything on the river. Nothing goes to landfill. We recycle the fly ash that is created when the waste gets burnt. But the food waste plants that we would have to take the food to would require lorry movements to get there, and you'd have to have lorries to pick it up separately from people's houses.
But we have lorries picking everything else up.
Let me bring in some other members of the panel. Marsha, where do you stand on Wandsworth record and this particular question of food waste?
Well, Wandsworth's record has been probably woefully inadequate. The fact that there was a report that was produced in 2010, was it? And nothing's happened to it is testament to that. But we're all talking about food waste, and it is one of the worst in the country. Next door in Lambeth, they are doing it, and it appears to be working well. The Wandsworth Council introduced Formula E in Battersea Park, disregarding the impact that it would have on that particular space. They have they've not got a proper safe cycling strategy that would be inclusive, that would ensure that disabled people can also be active, and they haven't brought in any vital air pollution measuring targets either. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm not sure that Wandsworth Council is taking it easy, and I must say it's really down to a cross-party approach that allowed them to actually declare that climate emergency that they did, and it came from Labour councillors and others to ensure that happened, and I'm pleased it has happened. But to claim that they've got a solid record on climate and the environment isn't right. I mean, there isn't any evidence to suggest that all these new developments that are being built, that they're actually doing it that is more sustainable and of a eco-friendly standard. And maybe Kim could actually confirm yes or no that is the case for all developments that are going up across Wandsworth.
Absolutely. Environmental considerations are at the heart of our building programmes and our development programmes. And it really isn't the case that the climate emergency was driven by the Labour councillors. And this is kind of what I meant in my first answer. I honestly think that we'll get the best results and we will have the best community coming together if we work together rather than sniping at each other from the sidelines. I welcome the input and the work that the Labour councillors put into the climate strategy with us. I absolutely welcome that. But it's just playing politics with an issue that we shouldn't be playing politics with. I think we should be able to congratulate each other and welcome each other's good ideas and explore good ideas and be able to have a discussion without attacking each other.
Lois.
One of the things we do is we would discourage councils from contracting out their services. Our recycling services are, I think, with Serco's store, and you all know what kind of organisation Serco is. And the other short, very quick answer is we would fund our councils properly so that they can actually do things about cutting down emissions.
Thank you. Right, can I have another question, please? And can we have, particularly on topics that we haven't covered here tonight, but I will, right now, I can see a red hand over there. Yeah, young gentleman over there. At least you look young from where I am. What's your name?
So, I'm Dominic. So,
I've heard some talk about Gatwick and Heathrow airports. So I've heard that flying is extremely bad for the environment. And so what are any of you planning to do about that if you get elected?
Right. Well, let me ask Jake. Would you carry on with the plans for Heathrow expansion, and would you give up flying?
Well, I mean, not really. I like flying, so.
Right. And what about Heathrow?
Look, my apologies to everyone. This is a debate that I've just sort of totally lost with, to tell the truth. So
Really?
I'm going to sit out.
Okay. He says it's I think you said it was a debate that you're totally lost with, and you're out of it on this particular question. Yeah. Okay, Mark, where do you stand on this Heathrow expansion, and are you yourself willing to cut back on flying, if indeed you fly?
Heathrow expansion, stop it immediately. We don't need another runway in the southeast of England. In fact, we don't really need any more runways anywhere in the country.
Why not? Do we not need more runways, more airport capacity for our future growth prospects?
No. If you look at the forecast at the moment, the forecasts are that the amount of people flying in and out of the UK will double. And that is unsustainable for us to hit a net zero carbon. We are going to reduce that by not building new airports, because we don't think we actually need that extra capacity. We do believe in building other transport links like rail lines and things, so to try and get people out of planes. But I mean, really, should we be flying domestically at all? Also, we're going to change the tax regime on flights, so that the first flight that you take a year, the first 1 or 2 flights, which is the majority of people, you will not be paying the airport levy on, because that is a normal family holiday. But beyond that, you will be paying an increasing amount of tax to be able to fly. Because remember, 75% of flights are taken by 15% of the population.
Right. Marsha, what are your views on Heathrow expansion, and indeed flying yourself?
So firstly, thank you for that question, Dominic. So when I was running to be the MP for Battersea back in 2017, I ran on a platform and a pledge that I would oppose Heathrow expansion, and that is exactly what I have done, and I've spoken out against the expansion of that particular airport in Parliament, and I also voted against that further expansion there. But I also think we must take a look at travel overall, and you have domestic and you have international travel. And I think what we need to do is improve our transport infrastructure across the country, so that would actually reduce the numbers of flights that are taking domestically, because if we have better rail travel for people, then they won't have to jump on planes. And I think that's something that we do need to look at. And also we need to look at the levies that people have to pay when they are flying.
But are you yourself willing to cut back on flights? I mean, do you fly?
I don't have the luxury to be flying all the time, Michael, but
occasionally.
Well, if I do go away on holiday and I have to board a flight, then I do that, yes.
So, but you don't plan to cut back on that?
Cut back on? I don't fly
on
as
holiday
often.
Flights, right? Okay.
Yeah. So
what about Kim? Are you willing to cut back on the flights you make? And where do you stand on Heathrow expansion?
On the Heathrow expansion, yes, I would not support the Heathrow expansion. In fact, as a member of Wandsworth Council, we are actually we're part of the action that we're taking against the government in terms of progressing the Heathrow expansion. So that's something which, I've got a sort of long track record of being pretty clear on.
Would you lie down in front of the bulldozers?
In front of the bulldozers.
As your leader is...
I'm not sure I would go that far. And in terms of taking flights, I do go on holiday with my family, but actually we often holiday in this country, so it depends. It's something that I would think about much more now, certainly.
Lois?
Is that asking me about whether I take flights?
Well, I have both questions. Heathrow expansion, I think I can guess the answer there. And flights. Maybe trickier on flights. People have been a bit coy about that.
It's an interesting question, and I think what Mark was saying about a levy on frequent flying is the way to reduce overall flying. It would be difficult to expect people who have family in faraway places never to take an aeroplane. On the other hand, the Eurotunnel was very nice, and when I visit Europe, I go by train. But there are other things we need to do to disincentivize, I don't know if that's a word, fuel, the aviation, and that is increased fuel costs. And then the current VAT exemptions there are on aviation fuels. We need also to work with our international partners, like those in the EU, Mark will be here, pleased to hear, to get together the sort of to bring in aviation fuel tax. That's an international issue. One country can't just bring it in. And to do things like banning tankering. I don't know if people are aware of tankering, that awful practice of taking on far more fuel than you need for cost reasons and then just chucking it out.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Lois. Right. There's a hand with a white sleeve right at the back. Can you give us the next question, please?
This isn't
Stand up.
Not so much for all the candidates, but just to Mark, if I may. So you've said you want to cut out domestic flights. Joe Swinson, your leader, has flown over 80 times from our constituency in Scotland down to London. How can we trust you're going to fulfill that promise when your own leader is doing that? And she's got the train 20 times.
We need to invest in other ways for people to get around. We need to invest in the railways. I actually am in favour of HS2 because I think that's a way of people being able to move around the country much quicker. If we actually expand HS2 up to Scotland, there will be no excuse for people from Scotland from not using it to get down to London. It is quite a long way to get from here to Scotland, and the roads aren't that great once you go north of the border, unfortunately. But I don't really want to spend money on roads. I'd rather spend it on mass transport systems that are green and environmentally friendly.
Right. Okay. Let's have another question. The gentleman there in the middle with the beard, I think. Yep.
My name is Hazard Stackwell. I'm going to just take up the challenge on public transport and railways, particularly, and I will admit I work in the railway industry. I've been reading a number of leaflets from a number of people about how we can improve public transport within Battersea and the border area. So I have a two-pronged question, really. First and foremost, I've seen a number of what I would call unrealistic proposals to improve existing train services at certain stations, taking no consideration how the railway operates. But more importantly, where do all the candidates stand on how to fund and progress Crossrail 2, which has been obviously part of this Crossrail 1 hasn't actually got up and running, but how, as the local MP, are you going to progress this? Because clearly, if you go into Vauxhall in the morning, you go into Victoria Station in the morning, you can be waiting to get on a train to get to wherever you want to get to, or even Waterloo. And it's a key bit of infrastructure which we need to have, and we actually need it to be funded now, not in 5 or 10 years from now, as has been stalled. And the Mayor has not helped progress this project as fast as he should have done.
Marsha, I presume you're in favour of Crossrail 2, maybe not.
Yes, I am.
And why isn't Sadiq Khan getting a move on?
Well, I'm obviously in favour of Crossrail 2, but one of the things that I am very proud when we talk about rail infrastructure is that a Labour government would actually renationalise all our railways, and that would ensure that we have a better rail infrastructure. Now, Crossrail 2 has come up against many problems, and I believe that the Mayor is doing all he can to ensure that this is going to be delivered, because you rightly point out a lot of our railway companies that are currently running these franchises, they are not delivering the best for us, and that is why renationalisation is the way forward to ensure that we have a
I appreciate your policy on the railways, but
that is fit for purpose.
It's only loosely linked with Crossrail 2.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
how you fund it. Nationalisation makes no difference. I reckon
Well,
we are a nationalised business. It's how the actual railways are funded and how we actually put in place the way to long-term plan and actually grow the railway. Crossrail 2, I know people who started the railway industry who actually started on Crossrail 1 and retired out of it without building it. We're talking about Crossrail 2. I actually know people who are working Crossrail 2. Realistically, as we stand at this moment, there's a key thing for this constituency. And if you are serious politicians who want to grow and make a better environment, bearing in mind the amount of people that have come into this constituency from 9 Islands, you're already looking at the Northern Line, which is 2 to 3 years behind. How are you as politicians actually going to make sure we get the money and we get the political will, and you as local councillors and as potential MPs are actually going to fund this to actually move forward?
Right. Do you want to say a bit more on that, Marsha?
the investment will have to be there to ensure we do this, and that's what I have to say on that.
And we could get it from taking it out of road building. We don't need any more roads.
That's a good point.
Right. What about, Jake, have you got any thoughts on this?
No, I haven't, I'm sorry.
Kim, what?
Yeah, I mean, I think Crossrail 2 is going to be essential. We all use the Northern Line. We all know how crowded and difficult it is to get on a train. So we need Crossrail 2 to relieve some of that pressure. We need it to allow us to get across London. We need it for the future. So I would be absolutely lobbying for investment and to make sure that Crossrail 2 goes ahead, both at a council level. Yeah, absolutely, both at a council level and at a government level.
Mark.
Crossrail 2 is part of the Lib Dem Manifesto, part of our £130 billion infrastructure investment over the next Parliament, the next 5 years, to make sure that actually goes ahead. Completely 100% behind it.
Okay. Right. Well, there's a red arm there. I can't see who it belongs to. Can you get up, please? And there we are.
Thank you. My name's Joanne. I want to ask about the international side of this. As we know that from the climate scientists, there needs to be quite fundamental action to shift away from fossil fuels, to shift away land use, shift on land use, a whole different concept on the whole economic engagement. I want to ask how you would promote this through trade agreements, through engagement with governments and so forth, to help us make together the dramatic improvements that need to be made.
Very good question. Kim Caddy, how does one persuade large foreign states to make substantial progress on climate change of the type that we're envisaging in this country, when we're also trying to persuade them to do trade deals? We might be trying to persuade them to behave better over human rights. How do you make that impact outside this country that is obviously necessary when our contribution is so tiny compared with the rest of the world?
Well, our contribution isn't tiny with the rest of the world, and it goes back to what I was saying earlier about us being global leaders. We're the first major economy to legislate for net zero carbon in 2050, and I think leading the way by example is a great way to start. We also obviously need to promote the diplomatic processes, and we're hosting, I think, the next climate change conference in Glasgow next year. And that's absolutely the way that we should be doing it. We should be showing global leadership. We should be putting pressure on these countries to meet the same targets that we're ourselves meeting. And we can also use international aid, I think, very effectively to improve climate change and biodiversity abroad. So making sure that we invest in programs abroad that will promote good environmental outcomes.
Mark?
If we want to make a difference to what's happening in the rest of the world, it's really important because we are one small island. We may have a bigger economy than some countries, but we are one small island in this world. If we want to make a difference, we have to stay within the European Union, the world's largest trading bloc, who actually has the power to influence the rest of the world. The United States have pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord. The European Union is staying within it. And part of our plan as the Liberal Democrats is to ensure that we use our influence inside the European Union to ensure that all of the other 27 EU countries are carbon neutral no later than 2050. And then we can use our influence then in our trade deals around the world. Britain on its own, one small island, is not going to have the power to stand up against those other countries.
Thank you. Lois.
Well, we're an internationalist party, and it's very important for us to work with the other countries around the world to find solutions. It's not a question of leading by example, because we need to understand the kind of problems that other countries face. We also need to show solidarity with people across the world in battles, like in Nigeria, the battles against the oil giants like BP, and also to make sure that we help bring in international regulation and our own regulation to source socially and ecologically sustainable supplies of goods from the global south. But of course, the right kind of trade deals, trade arrangements, is one of the most important things in that respect.
Marsha.
Thank you. So the Labour Party, as most people know, we are an internationalist party. It's probably the only time I'm going to say I agree partially with what Mark has already said. Being part of the European Union, we are part of the biggest trading bloc, and we are setting the example, and we are global leaders in that. And that is part of any requirement if there was ever to be any trade arrangements outside of that, because we have to set the standards, and we are global leaders in this. And so any trade arrangements we would be making outside of the EU would have to submit to our standards and practices. There's no way around that.
But your leader isn't pro-European, and your party refused to vote in your
You can't say that our party isn't pro-Remain. That's just not true. It might suit your narrative, but it's not true. That's a motion, and our manifesto is pretty clear. So have a read.
Okay.
Could you just answer one question for me? No. One question. Something's going around now.
All right. Let's take another question. The girl in the front row here. Tiff, if you could.
I'm getting tired and slow. Sorry.
Right. I think this will. I think we'll make this. I'm afraid. I think we better make this the last question from the floor, as there'll be people, especially with young children, who want to get home. But what's your name, and could you tell us what your question is?
My name is Maddie, and my question is, what will you do about education? Because when I first found out, I thought this was a publicised thing. When I tried to talk to people about it, they just asked me what I'm talking about. They had no idea. How will you make this more important to children? How will you make this more publicised?
Thank you, Maddie. Marsha.
Yes, thank you for that question, Maddie. And it's a good question, because every child and everybody should be taught this in our schools, and it has to be part of our curriculum. The environment, the climate, it is fundamental that all our young people in all our schools, and it should take place from very early years as well, because everyone can do their bit. And then we can all learn the small steps that we can all take can make a big difference. And so I know that it has to be part of the curriculum and how we teach our young people.
Mark.
Hi, Maddie. It's a really good point. Education is hugely important in this. We need to be educating our children in all sorts of fields, environment, everything else. We need to change the way our curriculum is done at the moment. It's done by government and needs to actually go down to be dealt with by schools and by to people actually learning the things they need to be learning, not just what politicians say they should be learning. And absolutely, environment needs to be part of that.
Lois? I haven't got a lot to add to those two. They're very much in
okay, good.
keeping with
Kim.
what we think.
Oh, thank you for the question, Maddie. I think it was an excellent question, and I think you're absolutely right. We do need to educate our children much more in climate change and environmental issues, and we should absolutely be leading the way on that. So thank you.
Right.
Yeah, I think I said that actually. Very good.
So what school do you go to? Right. Okay, thank you. Now I'm just going to ask one short question really, which is I'm going to ask each of the panel what they've done personally to contribute to reducing carbon emissions.
I've already said the tree one already, so...
Marsha.
So, what have I done? I can't mention recycling, which I do, but I've gone to using I'm preventing from using plastic, single-use bottles. So I'm trying to move away from that. But more importantly, getting around is a challenge for me. So I have to use taxis quite a lot. But what I am trying to do is, where possible, where I have an aide with me, using more public transport.
All right, thank you. Jake?
Recycling the normal stuff, and I've put an LPG conversion kit on my car.
Well, that's more than your leader's done. He was asked about this the other night, wasn't he? And he said, well, I go by car, I go around by plane, what can I do? I think he said something like that on ITV. Lois?
I've been quite active in quite a few of our local organisations, supported Living Streets and some of the efforts that they've made.
Yeah, but what have you done personally?
What have I done personally? Yeah. I don't own a car. I don't ever go in a car. I recycle.
Well, Lois, do you accept that some people need to use cars because the transport infrastructure isn't suitable for them?
Yes, that is very important. That sometimes, they need to use cars at the moment because transport doesn't exist properly. Public transport isn't sufficient. But I would like to just point out a few other things that we do here in the locality, not me personally, but me with lots of other people, and that's things like oppose Formula E in the Battersea Park,
But I wanted this question really to be about people's personal contribution. Kim?
So I cycle quite a lot. I walk as much as I can. I've got an electric car. I try and reduce plastic usage as much as possible. I try and use disposable cups. And I try and encourage my children to do all of those things.
With success?
Some. They're very good at recycling.
Mark, final word to you.
I've reduced the amount of meat that I eat, I've reduced the amount of plastic that I use, I don't drive, and I've taken a conscious decision not to own a car, and even I went to Amsterdam earlier this year and I made sure I took the train rather than flying. I'm trying to do everything I can to reduce my carbon footprint.
Well, thank you very much to all our panel for coming along here tonight. You've all got busy schedules. And only 3 weeks to go. 3 weeks today.
Quite literally.
Thanks for coming. We really are grateful. We've covered a lot of ground here. There's some stuff we haven't covered much, but we've covered most of the issues. And best of luck for the rest of your campaigns. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being such a fabulous audience and for such great questions, particularly from the younger members of the audience. Thank you.